Welcome back, everybody. Wow, what a day we've had so far. The opening with Madeline Perry introducing Ayanna Johnson, how you could get from regenerative ocean farming to ferocious love. What an amazing discussion that was. Danny Richter giving us a phenomenal legislative update, and we always expect some type of interesting analogy, but Princess Bride. Okay, Danny, I love that. And then Tony Serna being able to include Drawdown, En-ROADS, and Yale in a discussion about what would be next. Fantastic day. I don't know what breakouts you went to. I got to see the En-ROADS and handling criticism, and those were fantastic. What's going to happen now is in a little bit, Madeline Perry and I are going to tell the entire history of CCL going backwards and forwards in 15 minutes or less. But before that, we are joined by Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. We have had Dr. Hayhoe on in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different roles. You know, we've introduced her as a scientist, as a climate scientist, as an evangelical, as a Canadian, as an expert at the Nature Conservancy, but this time as an author. How cool is that? And I believe you're still in Glasgow. So if you decide to sprinkle anything about that experience, that'll be fine with us. But Katharine, thank you so much. It's so great to see you and welcome. If you please share with us about your new book.
Thank you so much, Mark. It is great to be with you. I just got back from Glasgow yesterday. So I was at COP26 and it wrapped up during this conference. The final statement was just released about an hour and a half ago. What was COP about? Well, it was first of all for every country in the world to get together to talk about what they could do to meet the Paris targets, which include keeping global temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius, which is 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit, and even lower, below 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is just below 3 degrees Fahrenheit if we can. But it's also about providing financing to low-income countries who are already suffering the impacts of climate change today. Climate change has already increased the economic gap between the richest and poorest countries in the world by as much as 25%. And so they were there to say, look, we produce hardly any carbon. What are we supposed to do? But it wasn't only countries there, Mark. It was so many more. I mean, obviously CCL was there too. The Rotary Club was there. The Nature Conservancy was there. Thousands of young protesters and old protesters were there. People across the whole range of the spectrum, from children to senior citizens, were there. Companies were there, many of them to say, here's what we're doing to help in the fight. Organizations, churches, businesses, all kinds of people were there from all walks of life. Why? Because climate change matters to every single one of us. No matter who we are, no matter where we live, climate change is already affecting us, and every single one of us has a role to play. So I just posted a link to the final statement if anybody's interested on my social media, on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. It's not everything that we hoped for, but it's a lot more than we had before. Specifically, it calls for countries to increase their emission reductions in line with the 1.5 degree target. You won't believe this, but it mentions fossil fuels for the first time. What you won't believe is it's the first time. Never before has a UNFCCC agreement specifically called out fossil fuels, and this one does. It calls for the elimination of subsidies on fossil fuels, which are astronomical. In the United States, taxpayer subsidies to fossil fuels exceed the Pentagon's budget. And as Secretary Kerry said, why should taxpayers be subsidizing the richest industries in the world? And a price on carbon is a way to directly address that. It also calls for the phase down of coal use. It would have been the phase out of coal use, but for the intervention of a few coal-heavy countries at the very last minute. And it calls for doubling the support to low-income countries to help them prepare for and adapt to the impacts of climate change, as well as to develop without producing more carbon. So as the envoy from Tuvalu said, there is hope. There is. Is there more to do? Yes, there's a lot more to do. We have to put all of this into action and we need more. But we have moved forward a big step compared to where we were before. And it isn't only about country representatives. Like I said in Glasgow, there were thousands of people there and only this many were official representatives. Who were all the rest? People, ordinary people. For every Leonardo DiCaprio who was there were 10,000 ordinary people there. And what were those people doing? They were doing what I say is the most important thing that any of us can do, which is to use our voice. Our voice is the most powerful force we have, and every single one of us has a voice that we can use to write, to speak, to share, to connect with others, to talk about why climate change matters and what we can do to fix it. Most people are worried. In the United States, 70% of people are worried about climate change. In my home country of Canada and in the UK where I just was, it's more like 75% of people are worried. Here in the US, 83% of mothers are worried. 84% of young people are worried. We don't need more doom-filled facts. What we need is hope. Because the majority of us feel hopeless and helpless when it comes to climate impacts. And so that is why I wrote my book. And this is the book that Mark referred to. I wrote this book, which just came out. It came out about 5 weeks ago here in the US, and it just came out last week in the UK. I wrote this book because the number one question that I get is what gives you hope? That is the number one question. And my answer is what gives us hope is recognizing that we're not alone, that climate action is happening, that giant boulder of climate action is not sitting at the bottom of an impossibly steep cliff with only a few hands on it, and it's never going to budge. No, it is already at the top of the hill. It's already rolling down the hill in the right direction. It has millions of hands on it already. And if we add our hand, it will go faster. CCLers are part of what gives me hope. And in this book, I tell the story of Marshall Sanders, and I tell the story of a couple of other CCLers. And if you want to know who they are, you're going to have to read the book. But I want to give you a little reading from the very end of it that talks specifically about hope, because that is what we most need, and that is what we can share with others. So the last chapter in the book is called Finding Hope and Courage. And it begins like this. What gives you hope? I hear this question from senior citizens worried about the world they're leaving their grandchildren, from young parents wondering whether they should have brought a new life into this world. I hear it from fellow scientists frustrated as their message falls on deaf ears, and from activists worn out after years of advocacy with few visible results. I hear it from nearly anyone who reads the news these days because the headlines often don't give us hope. Everywhere we look, climate is changing faster or to a greater extent than we thought. Is it possible to find hope in the midst of all of this? My answer to that is yes. And how? I make a practice of hope. I search for and I collect and I share stories and good news about people who are making a difference. Whether it's technology, nature-based solutions, small actions and advocacy, there is hope. And once we start to look for it, it is all around us. I'm a scientist, and science does tell us that it's too late to avoid all of the impacts of climate change because some of them are already here today. Others are inevitable because of the past choices that we've made. Science also tells us that much of what we do contributes to the problem. But the research that I do is clear. It is not too late to avoid the most serious and dangerous impacts, and it's our choices that will determine what happens. The future we collectively face will be forged by our own actions. Climate change is the barrier that stands between us and a breathtaking, exhilarating future that is so much better than what we have today. We cannot afford to be paralyzed by fear. We must act with power and love and a sound mind because together we truly can save ourselves. So that's why the book is called Saving Us. It's available anywhere books are sold, and it can help you talk about climate change. How? It has all kinds of stories in it that you can share. And what I'm doing over the vacation, over the Christmas break, this is what I'm doing. I'm creating discussion questions and short videos so that you can use it in your book club. And if you don't have a book club, maybe you could start a book club. Read the book. There'll be free discussion questions, free short videos to go with it, and have that conversation again about why climate change matters and about what every single one of us can do to fix it, starting with using, again, the most powerful force we have, which is our voice. Thank you.
On time and under budget. Thank you, Katharine. Thank you. That was fantastic. All right, I'm going to be joined by my colleague Madeline Para now, and in 15 minutes, we're going to tell the entire story of CCL going backwards and forwards. I'm going to handle the backwards part because I've been here since the beginning, and Madeline will handle the going forwards part. So when we were founded in 2007 by Marshall Saunders, we were founded for one thing, and that was to be a grassroots organization. We didn't have any solutions. We were just there because we said the climate needed a grassroots solution, and we kind of flailed around for a couple of years trying to find something. So if you were around in 2008, you learned laser talks on feed and tariff. But then it really looked like the momentum was towards cap and trade, and so we jumped on the cap and trade boat, and CCLers were arguing for cap and trade. In late 2008, Marshall went to a panel discussion in Washington, D.C. A gentleman by the name of Tom Stokes pulled him aside and said, listen, there is a far simpler, far more effective, far more transparent solution, and that is carbon fee and dividend. And so we made a pivot then. We lost half the organization because a lot of people thought we should be cap and traders, so we went from 20 volunteers to 10, but we were able to rebuild somehow. I went to my first panel on that in 2009, and that was hosted by our country's leading scientists, Jim Hansen, Cecil Corbin-Mack from the Environmental Justice Group, We Act, and Rob Shapiro, an economist from the Clinton administration. And it was the first time I was able to completely wrap my head around this as a solution, and that's what we did for 10 years. Then at the 2016 election, we were completely caught off guard by the Trump election, at least I was. We weren't prepared to respond to it, but we did within a month. And if you were on our December 2016 call, we realized that we'd lost the argument that we were making with many Republican offices, that if they didn't like regulatory approach, that they should offer a market-based one, given we knew the Trump administration was not going to support the EPA authority. So we pivoted to do some additional work in states, and we were successful in actually helping some bills get passed in states. The last 2 years have seen another piece of evolution. And that is, we found out that we could stay very focused on carbon pricing, but then add in secondary asks. And we've been very successful of getting other pieces of legislation either supported or passed, while at the same time remaining laser focused. So that's the short part of the history from 2007 till now. Madeline, how about your part?
Okay. That's a great history, Mark, and thank you. And it really has been a wonderful conference. I also just want to thank everybody who's worked on it. It's always a prodigious effort to put these things on. But here's where I want to start. I miss being with you all in person so much. So, to cope with that, in my mind right now, Mark and I are standing on a stage, and we're hand in hand, and we're together with you and celebrating what we've accomplished and looking at where we're going next. There's just such an incredible energy that comes from being in a room with 1,000 of you. So if you've been there, maybe you can conjure up those memories. And if you haven't, I just hope you have that experience someday, maybe June. And I'm so grateful to Mark. Now, if I was on stage, I'd be looking at him right now. Just as he's done for so many people. He's unfailingly supported me in whatever I wanted to try and held me to the highest standards at the same time. So I'm grateful to him and to Marshall Saunders, who founded CCL. I'm grateful for their vision and persistence and commitment, and for the tenderness that they brought to building this organization. And that, as Mark likes to say, we're 100% committed to our people, and we're 100% committed to our goals. And he always says, and there's no conflict between those. So as you've heard today, we think we're close to achieving our goal of enacting a meaningful price on carbon. I just think if a strong carbon fee could have been enacted 10 years ago, maybe we'd be thinking we'd turned the corner on solving climate change. But we all know it's very late in the game at this point, and we don't need to spell that out for you. So what we're going to do is take everything that we've figured out over the years, and especially over the course of this year in our big push, we're going to take all that and figure out the next most impactful things that we can do and press on. We'll press for the most strong carbon price that we can get enacted this year, see it implemented, defend it as needed, and strengthen it as needed. But that's not all we'll do. It's time for us to expand our focus to the next most impactful climate solutions that we can enact in addition to carbon fee and dividend. So staff's been giving this some attention already as part of our strategic planning. And after this conference, we're going to continue that process by seeking input from policy experts, from current and former members of Congress, from other groups ranging from the eco-right to the environmental justice movement, and from all our stakeholders. That means from you, from the staff, from our board members. So once we've gathered that input, staff will sort through it in order to narrow it down, because focus remains one of our core values. So this could take a few months, maybe even as many as 6, but we'd rather do this well rather than do it in a rush. And while we work that out, there's other things to do. First of all, of course, is that we get to celebrate what we won. Even if we don't get that last vote in the Senate, we are miles ahead compared to just a year ago when we were waiting for the election results. And of course, some of us need to get some sleep pretty badly and do whatever it is we do to restore ourselves after a mighty effort. So please, please take some time to do that if you're one of those people. But then we get back out there and we educate our communities on what was accomplished by Congress and what's needed next. I hope the pandemic is easing. It's hard to know how that's going to play out, but I'm sure that you're going to be able to get back to getting in person with people, making presentations, tabling, and talking with your neighbors. Soon, I hope, but who knows? And I also know that you know how to do that virtually, so we'll keep doing that. You know, 2022, that should be a big year of growth for CCL. As you're talking to people in your communities, sign them up and invite them to your meetings. And then when they're there, figure out the right level of engagement for each new person so that they can experience the satisfaction of working together on our big problems. And let's continue to put extra effort into being a welcoming place for everybody, and especially for conservatives, people of color, young people, really for all the voices that have been so often missing from the work in Congress on climate. Of course, I don't need to remind you that 2022 is an election year. We will again partner with the nonpartisan Environmental Voter Project to identify and turn out environmentally minded voters. And in addition, we're going to work extra hard at lifting up calls for climate action in the places where congressional leadership and candidates are watching closely. Now, we know we need to make climate an election issue everywhere, and especially in the swing states, swing districts, and wherever the swing voters are. We'll continue to be unwaveringly nonpartisan while we do this, because we know that actually both Democrats and Republicans need to see an electorate that wants more action on climate. So if you're new to the organization, please know that we have a place and plenty of room for your energy and your talents to whatever extent that you want and are able to bring them to this work. We need you. Our volunteers achieved something huge in our first 15 years. You built an organization with the grassroots army that many other organizations are in awe of. Mark built a staff that's dedicated to supporting you, matches your commitment, and is pretty darn nimble at responding to evolving situations. Together, you and the staff have built a reputation in Congress as an organization that works with integrity and effectiveness and is credited with moving Congress where it did not want to go for a long time, to a price on carbon. So here we are today, one vote away from successfully putting a price on carbon in the United States. And let's be honest, our eyes are on Senator Manchin of West Virginia. So this reminds me of a story that I love from the women's suffrage struggle. So I'm going to end with it. After many decades of organizing, 101 years ago, in 1920, the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote had finally made it through Congress. They needed one more state to ratify it, and they were running out of time. Tennessee was one of the last chances that they figured they had, but it really wasn't expected to pass. And then Harry Byrne, a Tennessee legislator, unexpectedly cast the tie-breaking vote on August 9th, 1920. He voted for it because his mother wrote him a long letter asking him to, and he held that letter in his hand as he cast the last vote needed to bring victory to a century of struggle for women's right to vote. Okay. I don't know when the budget reconciliation vote will be, and I don't know how it will turn out, but I do know that whatever happens, we will not stop until we've ensured a livable world for future generations. So thank you, everybody, for being here, and let's keep going.
Thank you for that, Madeline. That was absolutely beautiful. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you can all join us tomorrow. Good night, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow with some really great breakout sessions. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.